Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are going to riff off the Mathemagical quilt and see if we can't make a baby, skinny, and mini versions of it. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today I want to dive back into the Mathemagical quilt to see if we can do some other fun things. It's a great pattern, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to adjust and tweak it just a little bit, including making a version for a baby, making a skinny version, and I'll show you what I mean for that, and making maybe a mini version. So let's dive right in. These are the fabrics that I'm going to use to make a baby Mathemagical quilt. It's this super cute fat quarter bundle with the pandas and the koalas and I don't know, deer or whatever other creatures they are, but they're cute. There's 5 of them in the fat quarter set, but I've also pulled out this one from Sue's collection of fat quarters, which I think coordinates really nicely because the way I've resized Mathemagical, it calls for 6 8.5-inch squares. Now I could absolutely duplicate any of these, but I think 6 different ones is going to make it look really cute. I'm also going to need 19 rectangles and 18 of the smaller squares. I have this fabric over here if I decide I might want a border, but it'll definitely be the binding for the final project. And then I'm going to use just this plain white as the little grout between all of my pieces. So I'm going to put the pattern up on my website if you want to get it for a baby Mathemagical. This isn't going to be a full tutorial because you can watch my Mathemagical video to see the full tutorial on how to make this quilt. But it's going to be exactly the same. I'm going to cut the 1.5-inch pieces as the pattern describes, sew the little borders on 2 out of all of the 4 sides, lay it out, and we will have a little baby Mathemagical quilt. This is the baby Mathemagical laid out on the floor of my sewing room. And I wanted to lay it all out. Actually, I can see I've got too much turquoise over here. I'm going to have to move that around a little. I wanted to lay it all out because as I was cutting the squares, and more precisely as I was cutting the pieces for the grout, I don't have enough. So I have enough for all the little internal grout lines, but I don't have enough to finish the border around the outside edge. So what I think I'm going to do is sew all of the grout pieces on the inside, but not sew the grout pieces on the outside. And then I'll use this fabric here to put a border on the whole thing. This is going to be a little tiny bit more complicated, meaning I can't just quickly sew a top and a side. This piece, for example, will need just a top, but not a side. This piece also a top, but not a side. Same thing with the square, a top, but not a side. I don't want to do the right-hand side along these blocks, and I don't want to do the tops along those blocks, but all the other pieces will be sewn just as the instructions for the Mathemagical say, with the grout pieces to the top right. That way I'll have no border pieces along the edges, and then I can add this as my border all the way around. I have added all of the little grout pieces to my layout on the floor, and it was a little bit brain bending because these ones across the top don't have their top pieces, and this one in the corner has nothing on the top or the right side because that's the way all the grout gets put on. And then, of course, these ones don't have their right sides either. That's because I don't have enough of this fabric, but if I leave it all the way open all the way around like that, then I can add this border. So now I'm going to look for those spaces where the lines go straight through the quilt. So I'll sew that whole section together, and then there's 2 smaller sections here in order to put the quilt top together. And so this is the baby Mathemagical. I think it turned out really well. You can see, however, that I didn't get around to trading around the teal turquoise blocks. They're still in there all together, but I think that's okay.
It goes together really, really quickly, and I hope you give this one a try. Let's now move on to the skinny Mathemagical.
I've picked out these fabrics for the skinny Mathemagical. These are some more of the fabulous Tula Pink fabrics. And given how gorgeous the original Mathemagical is in Tula Pink, I thought I would give it a try in the skinny version. So, what makes a skinny Mathemagical? It's going to be in the size of the grout. So instead of cutting it 1.5 like we did for Mathemagical, I'm going to try and cut it at 1 inch. Now, to be honest, I think what I'm going to do is find a few pieces of scrap and give the 1 inch a try and see how I feel. I am nervous about cutting it all up and then realizing that I don't like it. So I'm going to find some scraps and give it a try. I have to change the dimensions because the Mathemagical is calculated to work with 1.5 inch strips. If you move that down to just 1 inch, then you've got to recalculate the size of the other blocks. So, like I said, before I get too deep into this, I'm going to grab a few pieces of scrap and see what it looks like. My experiments have shown that with the skinny edges, I like a slightly smaller square because the 8 or 8.5 inch squares just started to look a little bit weird. So, for these fabulous green Tula Pink fabrics, I have resized it. So, these blocks are 6 inches, these are 3 by 6, and these are 3 by 3. And I've also done a complete new layout, which I will put on my website as part of the pattern. And I've counted up how many of each of the 4 different shapes that I need. And if this is all sounding a little confusing, be sure to check out the original Mathemagical quilt video. I'll put a link in the description down below. It'll give you all the details. So I need to cut out of a fat quarter. I have found that cutting a strip at 6 inches, and then you can go either way because the skinny Mathemagical, and this is sort of the magic of it, because it's a 1 inch, the sizing doesn't have to be quite as obscure. If you remember in the Mathemagical, the pieces were 4 inches and then 8.5 inches. But in this case, because of the 1 inch grout, as it were, we only need, sorry, the measurements, the math adds up a lot better so that it truly is 1/2 and 1/4 of the large square. So based on the pattern, I need 24 of the large squares, and I've got 21 already, so I need to cut 3 more. So I'm just going to cut these out of the fat quarter, measuring 6 inches. It's very convenient that my ruler is a 6 inch ruler. I'm also going to need 6 more of the rectangles and 6 more of the squares. So I'm just going to be sure to cut what I need. I've also cut the 1 inch pieces to sew along the edges. These measurements will all be in the updated pattern for the baby skinny and mini. So you can get those exact sizes, but essentially that's going to be 6 inches, and this is going to be 6.5 inches to finish these pieces. And then you just sew them on and press them. And as you know, I'm pressing the seams open. Always press the seams open. So I'm going to finish this cutting, and I'm going to start my layout. Here is the first row of the skinny quilt laid out on my sewing room floor. This is about 39 inches wide in total, just for a bit of a sense of scale. Just a reminder, these pieces are 6 inches, 6 by 3, and 3 by 3. As always, I have pressed all the seams open, and you can see because it's only 1 inch, when you have a 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side, those seam allowances are matching up almost perfectly. So, as Jenny Don't Always says, it's not harder, just smaller. It is smaller, and I respectfully think that it is a tiny bit more difficult. You really need to make sure your precision is on point because there's not a lot of room for things to go wonky or things to be just a little bit off. So 39 inches across, that's the first section. I have about 5 or 6 sections in this pattern, so I'm going to keep sewing. I'm already dreaming it's going to be about 39 by 48, I think. So what I'll probably end up doing is adding some borders to bulk it out a little bit, and I think I'm headed towards an adult-sized throw quilt.
So this is the Skinny Mathemagical all finished. I put the 1-inch border on the left side and the bottom to finish it off. And then I decided I wanted to make it just a little bit bigger. So I added a 2.5 inner border and a 5-inch outer border just to make it into a nice adult sized throw quilt. So really happy with this. Let's see what happens now if we try and make a mini version of the Mathemagical.
And now we move on to the mini Mathemagical, which is this one here. If you remember a number of videos ago, a good friend, Sue, had given me a bunch of her fabrics that she wanted me to use. So in thinking about the mini, I thought we could go micro mini, or we could go to maybe practical mini. And so I've resized this one to use the 4.5 inch squares that Sue had given me. And so these pieces are 4.5. I also have the dimensions if you wanted to use 5-inch squares. So if you had a charm pack, for example. But I have a ridiculous number of 4.5-inch squares that I really wanted to use for this project. So these are 4.5-inch squares with 1-inch sashing, which makes these pieces 2.25 by 4.5 and 2.25-inch square. So yes, we could go to a micro mini doll size, but I actually do want to make this a little bit practical, and maybe that's just the practical part in me. So I'm not a micro mini person, but I think this is still going to be a mini mathemagical quilt. I'm going to use the same layout that I did for the skinny mathemagical. So I need 24 of the large ones. I think it's 19 of these horizontal, 17 of the vertical, and 40 of the squares. But this will all be in the pattern, so you can look that up. I'm going to use the same layout, and it'll be really interesting to compare the final size differences because in the skinny, these are 6 inches, but here they're only 4.5. So I think we're going to suck it all up and shrink it all down. So I'm going to lay this out, and I can't wait to see the results, and I can't wait to show you the results. So stay tuned. These are the two quilts side by side for comparison. I wanted to do this just to give you a sense of the difference between the skinny and the mini. So the mini isn't a micro mini like we discussed. It is definitely a baby quilt size. And if you look closely, some of the blocks are a little bit twisted, but they're exactly the same layout, block for block. And the difference between the 6-inch square on the right and the 4.5-inch square on the left really shrinks it up. I think they both look super cute. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Well, I'm just going to walk closer to the quilts really, and show you here how this one has a tiny little border all the way around. I wasn't thinking far enough in advance to really appreciate what kind of border I wanted on this. If I were to do it again in the future, I would probably do it the way I did the baby and not put the outer border on in the first place. But that second border actually gives it a little bit of a picture framed look, I think. And then because I wanted to make this one a little bit bigger in order to make it big enough for Victoria's Quilts Canada, I ended up adding the borders. It still also has that extra little border again because I was quilting without a plan. That's sort of what happens. So these are the mini and the skinny. Thank you so much for joining me on this adventure as we explore the opportunity and the potential of the Mathemagical quilt. What do you think? Would you make a baby version? Will you make a skinny version? What about the mini version? Is that too much? Or maybe just right? Really interested in what you're going to do with these ideas. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.